Hey everyone, Stacks here. Today I'm checking out XForce number 6. You got Benjamin Percy as your writer, Steven Segovia is your artist, and Guru Effects is your color artist. So what does that mean? It means we have a new artist. It means we don't have Joshua Cassara on this issue, but I'm going to say Steven Segovia covers well. It's a well-drawn book. It still fits that grittiness that I've talked about with X-Force, but in all honesty, the guy crushed it. It's a really good-looking issue. Bottom line up front, this is definitely a recommend. Go pick it up. And it's going into some darker tones, and some people are making some freaking mistakes in this, man. It is crazy, but let's go ahead and let's get into this. So the book starts in a rainforest down in Terra Verde, down in South America. You got Domino, Kid Omega, who's got his head strap back on. You have Marvel Girl and Wolverine, and they're on the mic with Sage, who tells them another click to the northwest and you should arrive on your target. Well, Wolverine throws up the halt sign, is like, hold on, sniffs the air and says, my nose says otherwise, Sage. The target's on us. That's when Sage comes over and tells him to proceed with extreme caution. Anticipate a hostile response. And by the way, this mission never happened, so don't leave behind witnesses. And that's when Beast starts describing his team, X-Force, as an orchestra. And to go ahead and quote him, because I had so much fun doing this on my preview, I think of X-Force as a dark orchestra. Some of us prefer the spotlight of the melody, like a shrill, brilliant violin, or a fun, emotive sax, while others harmonize in the background. Some serve a necessary function by mindlessly beating drums and crashing cymbals, pleasured in their violent rhythm. And there are those who are as versatile as a cello, able to play melody or harmony, to swing between the brightest and darkest of notes. And I am their conductor. Some of my musicians would refuse to admit this, but it's a fact. I am the mind, I am the conscience. I unify them and shape their missions and interpret their needs and control their pacing. I am in charge of interpreting all data for Krakoa. That means I control all information. And if some of that information is damaging to mutant kind generally, or X-Force specifically, I arrange the cleanup with bribes, planted evidence, false news reports, memory erasure, whatever it takes to hide our work. A helicopter crash because of a rotor malfunction. A lab burned to the ground because of a bad circuit. Really, I'd prefer to avoid trouble altogether. And that requires me to be in a state of constant anticipation, like a father chasing after his toddler, forestalling every steep drop and sharp edge and choking hazard. From there we jump to a white page called Xavier's Confession, and this one it's really interesting. It's talking about how Xavier actually hoped for death, how he was basically thinking, all these mutants who are here, they have it too good. They don't get it yet. They're not truly united. It's like this nice dream, this nice little wannabe fake utopia, but they're not united yet. He needed, as it says here, he needed their Lusitania. He needed their Pearl Harbor in order to scar them emotionally, to have them feel lost, and then have something to bring them together. And while his death, when he was killed, when he was assassinated, it did do that. It put that scar there. It brought everybody together, and it made it more real for the citizens of Krakoa. However, the two examples he used, the Lusitania and Pearl Harbor, are the events that brought the United States into World War I and World War II, and I think that's some foreshadowing by Benjamin Percy. Because even those moments in history of the United States, they awoke a sleeping giant. It also cost that giant a lot of its sons. It's from there we have a little bit of a flashback. We jump back to yesterday, and it's at the estate of the president of Terra Verde. And once again, Professor X is meeting with the leaders of other nations. He's meeting with the president here, and we find out that Terra Verde was one of the last nations to sign and to agree to accept drugs from Krakoa. And if they're not accepting the drugs, that means they're not recognizing Krakoa as a sovereign nation at this point. Well, with Professor Xavier this time is Black Tom Cassidy, because he's not letting Professor X out of his sight, and he like, he took it personal when Professor X was assassinated. He couldn't fight him off. He didn't detect those guys when they jumped in, despite the fact that they were wearing Domino's skin and all that stuff. None of that mattered. Ultimately, Black Tom Cassidy put on himself that he failed, and he absolutely refuses to let that happen again. And well, honestly, it's a good thing he tags along, because as this president begins to deliver this speech, a couple of these individuals in the crowd suddenly start growing these plant-like vine tentacles out of themselves and start attacking the crowd. They start attacking the president, and they look like they're going to try to assassinate him, up to the point where Black Tom Cassidy inserts himself. He's already wrapped the professor up in vines and has him protected. But all Black Tom Cassidy ends up having to do is make a couple threats, and in his own words, they ran off like a bunch of wee little babies with a wasp in their diapers. When, of course, this is the point where they're back briefing Beast and Sage, and that's when they start asking questions, Beast and Sage do, about, and did the president sustain any injuries? And he's like, only minor ones. And Professor Xavier, he had none, and that's what gets Beast thinking. So Sage goes back and starts checking the footage and realizes that they snatched the president's son. Well, with this new bit of information, Beast and Jean Grey decide to drop in on the president. And when they do, she starts reading his mind and realizes real quickly that his son is being held hostage so that he won't sign the recognition of Krakoa as a sovereign state, and that they won't start accepting the drugs. But that's not even the most disturbing part. The most disturbing part is that these individuals that are holding him they're scientists. They're telefloronic scientists, and they've been infected by their work. Whatever it was they were working on has basically affected them, and it's driven them mad. From there, you get a white paper that talks a little bit more about these guys. And what happened was the president, in a desperate effort to help his country, they invested heavily in what's the equivalent of nanite technology for plants. This stuff is so similar to what Forge is doing that Terra Verde accused the Mutant Nation of infringing on their property. And not just what Forge worked on, but also just like the Krakoan drugs themselves, they said was a replication, a plagiarism of their work that they've been doing. And taking all this information into account, Beast deduces that this is a bigger problem than it seems, because these infected hosts are organic equivalent to an Omega Sentinel, which in theory could just reproduce the whole version of the Omega cycle they went through with the Sentinels, with the mother mold, or the master mold to the mother mold, and you end up in the same extinction cycle as before, just this time it's plant-based. After hearing this conversation, Quentin Quire actually shoots a compliment Beast's way and says, "You're always 5 moves ahead, aren't you, Dr. McCoy?" And Beast replies, "Always." Once the team finishes off these guys, they make a break for it. They're heading to that location that was mentioned earlier, and Beast speaks through to Jean and says, "Hold up a minute. Remember what I said. You can't leave any witnesses." And he explains to her, like, look, these things are capable of healing themselves. It's basically, like I said, nanite technology. And she comes back with, "What happened to Kill No Human?" And he tells her, don't get caught up in the worthless moral quandary. These things are basically Omega Sentinels. They're less human and more plant. And she just asks, "Are you sure?" And he says, "Yes, I do. Truly, I do. These creatures are at a dangerous juncture." Can you imagine what happens if they begin to replicate? You would effectively have an organic Nimrod living on Earth. This is an absolute nightmare. This has catastrophic potential. Well, Jean, she handles business. She just absolutely rips these things apart, tears them up. Just, there's nothing left of them. They get burnt up. And at that point, Beast comes back over and says, "You did the right thing. Thank you, Jean." And she's ticked at this point. She just goes, "You know what, Beast?" He says, "Yes, Jean. Don't patronize me." But she didn't say it that nicely. But when she says that, she rushes back to where the president's son is standing on top of a temple, and you have all these organic Nimrod, or organic Sentinel, whatever things, attacking. And when they get closer to him, he basically converts himself into one of these seats. He is already infected. Well, I don't know if he thought he was going to win this fight or what, but he didn't, because he ends up strapped to a table sitting there beside Beast. And what Beast does here is kind of sick. Of course, he had to bring this guy in. He had to investigate this new threat. I get that. He had to investigate what their motivations were. And this kid's motivations, I don't know, he's a kid, he's his 20-somethings. His motivation is he believed that Terra Verde, he believed his country was close to perfecting this new coding of these telephonic, these organic nanites. And think what that would have done for this country as far as economically, and they wouldn't have had to accept Krakoan handouts. They wouldn't have had to accept the Krakoan plants. They wouldn't have had to recognize Krakoa as a sovereign nation. Basically, they were getting there on their own. However, what they messed up is they tried to weaponize this thing. And by weaponizing it, they put themselves on a path that directly intersected with the survival of Krakoa. So what Beast decides to do is he ends up reprogramming the cells. Now, I'm assuming this technology exists somewhere else in this country, so I don't think it completely eliminates it. But what he does with this guy is he reprograms the cell, and he makes it to where it basically attacks his brain, and it just eats his mind. I said that about that maybe this technology exists somewhere else in the country still, but since the scientists were all infected, perhaps not. I don't know. And of course, Beast justifies this by saying it's for the greater good. You know, what if his dad had known he was a traitor? It would have crushed him. And what would it have done to the country other than cause economic ruin? And Beast flat out says, is by returning him basically as this feeble-minded, kid that's alive, I've guaranteed that the president feels resentful towards the nationalists, but he feels indebted to us for returning his son. And in doing that, he'll accept our drugs, and he'll also save millions of people in doing so. Despite the fact that if they would have just invested in this technology more, they could have gotten there by themselves potentially. It's a really slippery slope. He's trying to justify some stuff that is messed up. But wait, there's more. So this kid's just sitting in the bed slobbering on himself when he starts just kind of melting away. And he melts away into what basically looks like a plant-based symbiote. And he goes out the window, he vines out, and once outside, he reforms and just walks away. It's like whatever cells these were, they still were able to fix themselves, to fix whatever Beast did to them to reprogram them, and now they're replicating on their own, and they effectively have a Omega Sentinel plant-based form in plant form. I mean, holy crap, man. What makes this even worse is that while these panels are occurring, the speech that is coming out of Beast's mouth, and I am a firm believer that pride always comes before the fall, but listen to this. Sometimes a little wrong makes a great right. Sometimes bold decisions must be made, and bold decisions are never made by a committee. That's why XForce exists. That is why I'm its conductor, because I'm always 5 moves ahead of everyone else, because I'm never wrong. Well, Hank, I got some bad news for you, buddy. You just created a plant-based venom symbiote that is an Omega level replicating freaking threat to all of Krakoa and all of the world. Great job. You were wrong on this one, bud. Alright, so as far as the overall review for this book, absolutely fabulous. XForce has been #1 on the list, week after week. I'll probably give it to XMEN this week just by a hair, but still, I mean, it was an exceptional issue of XMEN this week. And the reason that is because both of these feel closer to the storyline of House of X and Powers of 10. The idea that there are these other threats, the one that we saw over in XMEN, if you haven't seen that, I won't spoil it for you. Over here in XForce, this new, botanic symbiote or whatever we're going to call it. I mean, there's these new threats that are being introduced, and it's really Jonathan Hickman laying out these breadcrumbs that are going to lead to future storylines down the road. I mean, if you go back to the post Giant Size X-Men, the first little bit of that run with Claremont, you had a ton of characters introduced. Every time you turned around, it seemed like there was another character getting introduced there for several issues. But those characters ended up tying into much longer storylines, and I think that's what you're going to see here with what Jonathan Hickman's introducing and what Benjamin Percy is tying into this as well. I talked last week, actually I think it was during the preview video, about Beast and how this is very much seeming like Dark Beast from the Age of Apocalypse, and he came over into this universe at one point. They drug him over, and it's crazy. I mean, I'm really enjoying it. I'm wondering how much of an effect Krakoa is having on these people still. And we're just going to have to wait and see, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Just help me continue to grow the channel, guys. I sincerely appreciate it. And hit the bell for notifications. That way when a new video pops, you can hop on it quick. Especially for some of those preview videos I do usually on the weekends. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video. It helps draw more views to the channel. And of course, guys, comment down below. Tell me what you think. Did Beast do the right thing here? Did he just screw up? Did he just put them on another, extinction timeline by taking this course of action? You guys tell me in the comments below. And that's all I got, guys. Real Comic Stacks out.